Hello and welcome to Dark History Tale, where we introduce you face to face with historical characters and explore extensively their history, peeling away the layers of ambition, love, intrigue, and survival that define them. Diane de Poitiers was the king's official mistress and advisor to King Henry II of France. Her existence was characterized by a fiery relationship with Henry and a venomous rivalry with his wife Catherine de Medici. Depending on the perspective you choose, Diane was either King Henry II's great love or an opportunistic woman who utilized her experience of the world to entice an adolescent man on the threshold of maturity. Today we will be looking in more detail at Diane's background, scrutinizing the historical context, personal reasons, and cultural forces that characterized her time, before treating her image and portraits and unveiling recreations of what she looked like at the end. So let's proceed and unwrap the layers of years to uncover the richness of this incredible woman. Diane de Poitiers was born on the 3rd of September 1499 in the fairy tale town of Saint-Vallier in the Dauphiné province of France, to John de Poitiers, Seigneur de Saint-Vallier, and John de Batarnais. Her father was a sportsman and a nobleman with royal court connections, who gave her the name of the Roman hunt goddess Diana after his love of outdoor activities, and maybe in a way that hinted at Diane's own lifelong love of horseback riding and the backcountry. But Diane herself preferred to focus on a more mystical bond, saying she was named for the goddess of night and the moon, creating an aura of mystery and otherworldly beauty that she would nurture throughout her existence. As family lore had it, an elderly woman who came to visit baby Diane uttered a prophecy that her star would someday shine higher than a queen's, a story told and retold throughout her early life, filling her with a sense of destiny and unbreakable drive in the unsettled politics of Renaissance France, where noble families worked alliances, wars and intrigues at court to promise their futures. Tragedy befell her early on when her mother passed away in 1506, so Diane was left to be raised mostly by her father in a home that combined the discipline of noble training with the liberties of country living. By the time she was 7, Diane was already showing incredible aptitude, keeping stride on horseback with her father on hunting expeditions, and mastering her own pet hawk, accomplishments that not only refined her physical power, but also reflected her developing independence in a world where women were frequently confined to their homes. This training instilled resilience that would be essential in the ruthless game of the French court, where survival required not only beauty and intelligence, but cunning and steadfast presence. Diane was taken to the French court as a young woman to be taught by Anne de Beaujeu, also called Anne of France, a powerful noblewoman who had previously acted as regent for her brother King Charles VIII. Anne, a humanist and practitioner of statecraft, taught Diane a wide-ranging curriculum that was far more than the shallow graces demanded of waiting women. Diane had studied finance, etiquette, law, arts, and architecture, and had cultivated a deep passion for reading and books that formed the bedrock of her intellectual self. More importantly, Anne schooled her in the fine art of court survival, how to converse knowingly on topics that suited others, how to read people and serve their individual tastes, and how to tread the treacherous undertows of intrigue, betrayal and favoritism that characterized life at court. This education was in the shadow of the flowering of the Renaissance in France, spurred on by Italian humanism and the patronage of King Francis I, who converted the court into a center for art, literature, and intellectual debate. It was during this period that Diane met prominent individuals, among them young English maids, Anne and Mary Boleyn, both present at court, a captivating intersection that speaks to the entangled network of European nobility, in which connections and adversaries stretched across continents, and would later resound in the sensationalized chronicles of England and France. By the time she was 15, Diane had become a celebrated beauty, with reddish gold hair, sparkling blue eyes, and a notoriously clear, radiant complexion that appeared to defy the forces of time. Her mind and quick tongue were just as fascinating, winning praise in a court where looks and words could make or break fortunes. However, the realities of noble life intruded, and Diane was arranged to marry Louis de Breze, Comte de Maulevrier and Grand Seneschal of Normandy, one of her father's friends, and a man nearly 40 years her senior. Though not a love match, the union provided wealth, titles, and security, anchoring Diane in the upper echelons of society. The pair settled in the Château d'Annette, some 50 miles west of Paris, a house which Diane later converted into a Renaissance gem. Never leaving her domestic responsibilities behind, Diane regularly returned to court in the service of the Queen, reconciling wife and courtier roles with poise. In January of 1518, Diane bore her first daughter, Françoise, and a second in 1521, Louise. Remarkably for the period, in which noble women tended to leave childcare to servants, Diane took a strong interest in her daughter's upbringing, showing a caring side that was somewhat at odds with her aggressive public persona. She loved children, showing not only brilliance, but true caring, in an era where maternal interest was unusual among the elite classes. While Diane and Louis never met the romantic fervor she perhaps longed for, they developed a solid bond and friendship. He was a stern guardian of his young wife, and their union gave her stability amidst the turmoil at court. Diane's visibility increased, and she received invitations to witness the births and celebrations of France's princes, the Dauphin Francis in 1518 and Henry in 1519. They were elaborate affairs. Most notably, the preparations for Francis's birth featured the designs of Leonardo da Vinci, Italy's great master, brought to France by King Francis I, with whom Diane might have had some interaction, enriching her early court life. She also probably encountered Lorenzo de' Medici, serving as proxy for the Pope at Francis's baptism, entwining her life with powerful Medici family that would one day become her enemy through Catherine. At this time, Diane seemed to have a life of enchantment. Wealthy, youthful, lovely, and close to royalty, the epitome of the Renaissance notion of the accomplished noblewoman. However, the wheel of fortune soon changed. In 1523, a plot against King Francis I, orchestrated by the Constable de Bourbon, amid ongoing wars with the Holy Roman Empire, implicated Diane's father Jean. Arrested for treason and sentenced to death, his plight devastated Diane, testing her resolve in the unforgiving arena of royal justice. Drawing on her education in diplomacy, she maneuvered to secure a private audience with the king and queen. Terrified but unflinching, she implored beautifully on behalf of her father's life, her words a mix of persuasion and dignity that she had learned through Anne of France. Relieved, the sentence was reduced to imprisonment, though not before Jean suffered the psychological torment of having to spend an hour with his head on the block, a grim reminder of the power of the monarchy. Rumors swirled that Diane had become Francis I's mistress to save her father, though evidence is scant. Such whispers persisted throughout his reign, fueled by Francis's notorious appetite for lovers, which often overshadowed his diplomatic failures, including defeats in the Italian wars. King Francis I's reign was a tapestry of ambition and excess. His quest for Italian lands ended in disaster at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, where he was taken prisoner and held for ransom in Spain by his arch-nemesis, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. To effect his ransom, Francis sent his young sons, Francis and Henry, as hostages, a 4-year nightmare from 1526 to 1530. The princes faced deteriorating conditions, transferred to damp, dark cells with barred windows. The older Francis contracted smallpox and became blind in one eye. Their father, meanwhile, indulged in comfort at home, setting off the glaring contrast between royal privilege and sacrifice. When the boys returned in 1530, they were rough, sulky, and introverted, hardened by loneliness and deprivation. By this time, Diane was an accepted courtier. For her devotion, the king and queen rewarded her by making her responsible for tutoring Prince Henry, future Henry II. The time spent together established a strong connection, combining guidance with love in the highly emotional environment of a court rebuilding after war and captivity. Music. Tragedy struck again when Diane, 31, lost her husband Louis in 1531. Although not a love match, it was a supportive one, and his loss left her with an abiding emptiness. In a time when widows frequently lost control of their finances to male kin, Diane was able to maintain power over her husband's holdings, becoming one of the richest independent women in France, a sign of her intelligence and of the regard in which she was held. Beautiful, independently rich, highly intelligent, and now liberated, Diane was confronted with decisions: remarry, retire in luxury, or reach higher. She opted for the latter, seeking royal power amidst the shifting powers of the Valois court. To this end, Diane developed a personal style of long-lasting sophistication. Mourning her dead husband, she took black and white as her colors of choice, representing widowhood but suggesting lunar purity, and took up the goddess Diana's symbol, 3 entwined crescent moons. She went in for strict regimes of self-care, such as daily riding, cold baths, and beauty treatments, which helped her keep her looks in an era of primitive hygiene and high death rates. Legend has it that she ingested an elixir infused with liquid gold to maintain her energy, a practice not shown to have resulted in damage, but reflective of the alchemical fixation of Renaissance Europe, where aristocrats yearned for immortality and foreign potions. At court, politics shifted. In 1533, Prince Henry, 14, wedded Catherine de Medici, also 14, in a marriage negotiated for purposes political. To contemporaries, Medici evoked Florentine banking merchants rather than grandeur, and the marriage was unpopular, seen as beneath French royalty. Yet it brought a substantial dowry and ties to the papacy, proving strategically vital over time. At the wedding, Henry was not yet heir apparent. That role belonged to his elder brother Francis. It is said that sometime around 1534, shortly following Henry's marriage, Diane began a romantic wooing of the 15-year-old prince, although some histories give the consummation of the affair as later, when he was 19 and she 38, highlighting a 20-year difference in age. Allusions in their letters indicate closeness developed quickly, so they became lovers. This behavior disturbs contemporary sensibilities. Henry aged 15 or 19, Diane aged mid-30s, but Renaissance convention regarded adulthood differently, with early marriages for nobility the norm. Nevertheless, it is simple to imagine Machiavellian calculation on Diane's part, using her maturity to seduce an emotionally vulnerable young man, shocked by captivity and marrying for lack of alternative. The age difference gave her dominance. Poised, mature, and sophisticated, she eclipsed both Henry and Catherine, who resented Diane's intrusion but was helpless in the face of it. Henry's romance with Diane, which flared so early in his marriage, sparked a lifelong competition between the two women, against the background of court politics. With the heir Francis tragically dying suddenly in 1536 at 18, surrounded by rumors of poisoning, the equilibrium changed beyond recognition. Henry, Diane's paramour, was now Dauphin, raising the stakes in this triangular drama. Henry and Catherine were childless for the first 3 years of their marriage, a crisis in a succession-obsessed dynasty. Henry fathered a daughter with another of his mistresses, Philippa Ducie, demonstrating that he was fertile and humiliating Catherine, whose infertility made her susceptible to divorce, a fate potentially destabilizing alliances. Diane, ever canny in her own survival, saw that a divorce could threaten her own standing. Thus, despite their antagonism, Diane and Catherine forged a pragmatic alliance. Diane urged Henry to fulfill his marital duties, even allegedly providing bedroom advice, including unconventional methods like pre-stimulating him before sending him to Catherine to ensure heirs. This intervention bore fruit. Catherine conceived in 1543, eventually bearing 10 children, securing both women's statuses in a court where fertility equated power. When Francis I died in 1547, Henry became King Henry II, marking Diane's apogee. Her power grew exponentially, beyond friendship to include political and cultural advisory positions. She accumulated riches to build and restore chateaux, like Annette and Chenonceau, hiring Renaissance architects like Philibert Delorme, and artists like Jean Goujon, supporting poets like Pierre de Ronsard, and promoting a courtly cultural renaissance. As unofficial ambassador, she received dignitaries in her estates, and boosted France's diplomatic reputation. Even though she was not officially part of state decisions, Henry took advice from her, co-signing letters as Henry Diane, and granting her crown jewels, a scandalous privilege. This union lasted for decades. Diane an unabandonable presence, her influence remarked upon by ambassadors, such as the Venetian Lorenzo Contarini, who commented on Henry seeking her counsel after dinner every evening for more than an hour, debating all issues of consequence. She became a member of his privy council, something Catherine was denied, who fumed in the background, coveting the queenship Diane had de facto taken upon herself. To Catherine, Henry would have made Diane a queen had he been able, and there is evidence to suggest he may have in his public displays, such as wearing her colors in tournaments and coupling their initials in monograms. Henry indulged in occasional mistresses and fathered illegitimate children, yet Diane was his lifelong friend, her role a mix of emotional attachment and political marriage. But Diane's authority was perilously dependent on Henry's love, making her invincible and vulnerable at the same time. In the summer of 1559, at a jousting tournament honoring peace treaties, Henry, clad in Diane's ribbon, was seriously injured. A shattered lance hit his eye, blinding him and throwing him from his horse. For 10 tormenting days, he lay between life and death, with Catherine at one bedside and Diane at the other. Soon, Catherine excluded Diane from the chamber, dismissing Henry's pleas for her, a final act of retaliation. King Henry died of infection at age 40 on July 10, 1559, now regent for their young son Francis II. Catherine ended Diane's period. In spite of the rivalry, Catherine allowed Diane to keep most possessions and gifts, but insisted that the crown jewels be returned and unofficially banished her, in exchange for exchanging Cheneseau for the smaller Chaumont. Diane went back to her favorite Chateau d'Annette, asking forgiveness for past transgressions and living in peaceful contemplation until a horsefall in 1565 broke her leg. She died there on April 22, 1566. At age 66, her body later desecrated during the Revolution, but again found and reburied in 2008. Analysis of her remains showed high levels of gold, substantiating the legend of her elixir, which was possibly responsible for her death from chronic toxicity, a sad irony for a woman who resisted aging. Diane was finally a woman of deep contradictions, kind and soft in her love of children and daughters, but driven by hot ambition, survival skills, and a dragon-like amassing of wealth and power. She played Renaissance France's patriarchal rules with unmatched dexterity, using education, beauty, and brains to exercise power unofficially, whichever view one takes. Her life was a success according to her own terms, bequeathing us a legacy of cultural patronage and family survival. The French kings Louis XV and XVI were direct descendants of her through daughters, and thus her legacy continues, a testament to the lasting influence of those who toil in the background of thrones. So what did Diane de Poitiers actually look like? Considering that she was a titled nobleman's wife from the age of 15, one would think to see many formal portraits, but we have mostly sketches. Luckily, they were made by Jean Clouet, the skilled court painter to King Francis I, whose son Francois took over from him and painted such figures as Mary, Queen of Scots, including a subsequent sketch of Diane. Jean Clouet's black and red chalk drawings conceal her hair color, potentially bright red, blonde, or richer brown, as hinted by dubiously attributed portraits. Diane's beauty was not only based on features but on the extreme care taken of her, giving her a florid, radiant complexion and gradual aging that amazed contemporaries. The French historian Brantome, encountering her at the age of 66, said, "I think if this lady had lived for another 100 years, she would not grow old," crediting her beauty to intelligence, wit, and vitality. She was associated with numerous allegorical portraits depicting her as the goddess Diana, although she most probably didn't sit for them. Nonetheless, these she loved, fitting into her self-mythology. As entertainment, I'll refer to a 1525 drawing, when Diane was around 25, which is reputed to be from life. Let's see Diane de Poitiers' face now then.